Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman podcast.
That's the other thing too. You can always get better. You can always get better. And I think that's what the top guys understand. They're going out there, they're doing big things, they're really performing at that top level, but they're also always striving to take things to the next level.
Hello, Sales Nation. I am Will Barron, host of the Salesman podcast, and welcome to today's show. Today's show, we have the sales expert, Kerry Sullivan, and we're diving into how you can essentially become the best salesperson you could possibly become. So we cover a bit of sales training, we cover a bit of self-help, a bit of Tony Robbins, and a whole lot more. You can find out about Kerry over at howtokickassinsales.com, where he does a daily video and a daily podcast, well worth checking out. And with that all said, without further ado, let's jump into today's show. Hey, Kerry, and welcome to the Salesman podcast.
Hey, Will, thanks for having me. Really excited to be on here because as you and I were just discussing, I actually listen to the podcast quite a bit. So I'm excited to be here. It's one of my favorites.
Good man, good man. I'm excited to have you on. I've changed some of the questions that I ask at the end of the show as well, so you're not going to be familiar with them no matter how much you've listened to the show, so that'll be interesting to get your thoughts and responses on them. But yeah, what we're going to talk about today is essentially how we can all become the best salesperson we can be. It's quite an open and broad title, very specifically, because I want to get your thoughts on a lot of this rather than me lead perhaps where I think salespeople can improve, just because I know you've got a wealth of knowledge on this, and with your background, you've got a quite unique, experience and point of view to put across. But to put us in place and to start the show and give us context, what percentage of salespeople do you think out there in the marketplace, B2B, are really performing at the optimum top level?
I wouldn't say it's that many. I mean, I think when you break things down, you can kind of look at the Pareto principle, the 80-20. And even within that 20% where you get your top guys, there's a big difference between, those bottom 20% guys and the very top guys too. So I think that maybe that, and that's the other thing too, you can always get better. You can always get better. And I think that's what the top guys understand. They're going out there, they're doing big things, they're really performing at that top level, but they're also always striving to take things to the next level, right? And, I had a coach one time, he said to me, he said, do you know what happens to a tomato once it ripens? I go, no, what? And he's just like, it's like, well, it rots. He's like, you always got to keep learning and going, because if you're not growing, you're dying, as they say, right? So, yeah.
Man, I love how positive you are, and I'm going to probably put a bit more British negative into the conversation first, and then we'll come back to the positive side of things. But why do you think, if clearly there's routes and paths to all of this? There's shows like this where you can listen for free. It's just time that you've got to invest to improve yourself as a salesperson, and there's lots of specifics, I'm sure. But why are there? Probably not even 80-20. Why are there like 95% of salespeople that don't perform as well as what they should do?
Yeah, different reasons, right? And I think some of them just don't know. They just don't know what to do in terms of really what it takes to perform at that top level, right? So I think a lot of the time too, people try to blame it on the individual, but one of the things is that you have to look at the system that they're playing in first. And most of the time, if someone's playing in a good system, they're going to be able to go and perform at a higher level. And a lot of people try to blame it on that one individual. So, one of the things in sales is a lot of sales organizations, they have a huge turnover rate, right? And they bring in these new recruits, they train them all up, and then I don't know what the average is. Maybe you would know better than me what the average burnout rate is in a sales organization. It's huge though. Like the turnover in a year, it's like you're doing good if you can keep like 30 to 40% of them. Like you're doing really good. So I think a lot of the time too, you got to look at that system and really give people the tools to do the best they can in that system too. And it's both, because there's definitely personalities and people who they just don't really have it. It's not the best fit for them either. So it's a combination, but I think a lot of the time you got to look at the system and what they're playing in first,
And just very briefly, because, the system is perhaps something that we as the individual salesperson are going to struggle to change in an instant, whereas other things we can work on and have more leverage on. But what do you mean by the system? Are you talking about internally within the organization?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. And yeah, you can control the system as well more than you think, with what you're doing every single day with your daily habits and actions and everything like that. But yeah, I'm just talking about the system that people go into, right? The training, how the attitudes that are placed on these people, the expectations that are set for these people, and also just like a system of how they can actually go out there and get results every single day. So, just how to deal with certain things, right? How to deal with if they get hung up on, how to deal with if they can't get a hold of a person, and just having these really effective systems and in place. And a really good system is broken down into that kind of Kaizen principle, right? Where it's always being measured and always getting improved upon and putting things in place. And when you have those type of systems and good training in place, there's companies out there that do a great job with training, and their sales guys come out there and do really good, and they're highly recruited in other places. And that's an example of a system and an overall thing that works that way.
And just to name drop, what would be one or two of these companies that you personally feel are highly regarded in the industry, perhaps?
Yeah, Salesforce, they've got a pretty good, obviously they've got CRM, but they do a good job with training their guys. Another one is the good old Xerox example. They do a pretty good job in doing that. And there's other examples of sales organizations that do a good job of really producing high quality guys. Recently someone told me FedEx does a really good job too. I don't know. They said that was true 15, 20 years ago. I don't know if it's still true, but yeah, so you can really see that.
Well, no, this is totally anecdotal. There's no data on this, but it seems that at least, say, a quarter of the people that come on the show have had some kind of background experience with Xerox or IBM or these companies 20 years ago who very specifically were leading the way with things. And I guess Salesforce is probably the new generation of that. And there might be startups that will, in 5 years' time, will look back and say, well, they're the step along the route. Sure. So to put systems aside for 1 second, let's talk about, the underlying levels of some of this that you mentioned before, personality types and traits. I think we've done it to death of what personality traits do work in sales, how it's kind of cliched to a certain extent, how anyone can learn how to sell. But what, from perhaps even I hate the sentence or the phrase self-help, but what can we learn and what can we do from a self-help level to improve our ability to sell?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things is you got to have that attitude that you can always get better, right? So it starts with that, and just having that kind of locus of control that you can go out there and actually make things happen, right? And then when you really break it down, again, it gets into, I'm going to go into kind of systems of knowing how to do things again. And so example, again, to just kind of give a better example of maybe what a system is there's the goal of losing weight, okay? And that's the goal, and everybody thinks that's enough just to go out there and have that goal to get it done. But the system is going to be like the workout program and the diet, right? And that's what really makes it happen. It's the same thing. So if you look at a lot of the different self-help guys out there and the sports psychologists and coaches out there, they all have different things, right? So there's a guy named Lanny Basham. He was one of the first guys that really got involved with sports psychology. He pretty much set the standard for that and invented it, right? And he comes up with the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the ego, right? And just really get into things like that. Then you get like Tony Robbins talking about I think he calls it it's like a 3 S's or something like that. But you get into like thoughts, beliefs, emotions, right? Mind, body, soul. The Navy SEALs have their big 4, but it's basically all the same thing, right? And if you're able to control your thoughts, your beliefs, and your emotions, right? That is where it comes down to. And if you have a system in place that's able to do that, you're able to really get things done. And then lastly, you can control the thoughts, beliefs, and emotions, but then you got to have number 4, which is taking that action and really making things happen. So, and when you break those things down, break all those things down, then that's when you can really start to get in the head game and the headspace of really getting in there and getting the job done that way when you use those four things. I can break it down more if you want, but
sure, we will in a second. But what I want to just get out of this at that point there, because I totally agree with everything that you're saying for sure. Which is more important, sussing out the perfect system for you and going over it over many years and revisiting it and diving deeper into it, or is it more important just to choose somebody's system? For example, I'm a huge fan of Tony Robbins, and just stick with it and not shop around, not mess around. And is it more important to just get it done, or is it more important that it's perfect?
Well, it's a little bit of both, right? I mean, end of the day, it's about results, right? So you got to have a system that works, right? And that's the main thing, because the other thing with systems too is you could take like a really good sales guy, you could put him in a system that is horrible, and he's not going to do good. And vice versa, you can take an average sales guy, put him in a good system, and he can go out there and crush it for whatever reason. So there's all kinds of elements in there. But I think, something that's proven, and then once you get in that system, you can always keep trying to tweak it and make it better and measure things and go from there.
Yeah, what I was getting at with that is that so my background is chemistry, science. I like tweaking. I like messing around with stuff. The reality that I've found, however, though, is that as soon as I try and do that, I procrastinate. I'm not actually doing what I should be doing. And even though it pains me to say it in a lot of ways, I get better results by just taking the formula, not messing with it, and just running with it. Because, of course, when you look at it in reality and you take that step back, most of the time, there's probably millions worth of research that's gone into it. It's over a huge course of people. And it's tried and tested to a certain extent. And I'm not talking about specific sales methodology, because obviously that needs to experiment and change with your customers. I'm talking on a higher level. Do you think it is always better to experiment?
Within a certain degree. So like, if a system works, like you're talking about there, just take it in the beginning and apply it and use it. Do not mess with it. It's not like you want to take a system and be like, oh, I can make this better and whatever in the beginning. No, get in there and just go at it, right? And use it. And then from there, you can start measuring things, and then you can start tweaking it, right? And going from there. And that's kind of the principle of like a Kaizen type principle, right? You're always looking for ways to constantly improve on what's going on, and even within the system and things like that. But sometimes you can get a really good system and it's rock solid, and it has that in it already, that principle of measuring things and then getting better at it or whatever. And the best ones are the simplest. I think so often that I come from an athletic background and everything, and one of the things I found too is that there's a lot of business books out there and sales books out there, but the guys that have the best books are, I think, sports coaches. And the reason is because they have to get results like that. Those guys, it's like in England with the Premier League coaches over there, if they're not getting results within like the first 10 games, some of those guys are getting fired, right? Well, coaches have to come in there. They have to have systems in place, and they have to know how to get results fast. And they're simple. And so many times there's guys and gurus out there that will have their 37 steps or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, if you give people any more than 4 steps, they're not going to remember it. They're not going to remember it. Even more than 2 or 3. I mean, it gets harder, right? So you got to keep it simple. And sports coaches, the top guys out there, they keep things really simple. It's really effective, and it has to work, because if it doesn't, their job's gone. And it's kind of the same in business, but there might be a little bit more leeway that way. They might give people a little bit more time, but it's all about.
You explained what I was trying to get out there, Kerry, better than what I did. So perhaps I wasn't talking about the process of refining things. What I tend to do, and you said it perfectly, I make things way more complex than what they should be doing, what they should be. Yeah. So for example, I have a podcast, and I should get more people to listen to the podcast, because that compounds the ad sponsorship that comes in. That's it. It's not more complex than that. But I go out of my way to make it as complex as possible, and that's when the procrastination stuff comes in. So you're spot on. The refining of things is the right way to go about it. Making it simpler, I guess, is a refining step in itself. And you mentioned your athletic background then, so I want to talk about a little bit about perhaps sports psychology, the triathlete side of things, and is the grit that is used in an event like that, where you're running, cycling, and swimming to as pushing yourself as hard as what you possibly can. is the grit and the determination and everything that's behind that, and the pressure, I guess, is that all the same in business? When I guess the scenario that I've got is, so I'm doing a lot of half marathon running at the moment.
Yeah.
3/4 of the way into the half marathon, I feel good, and it's that last like push, and you break through it. And I have the same thing where, you know, perhaps I'll get up, I've edited a podcast, I need to then go and do outreach or marketing, and I feel it's a similar kind of push and breakthrough, even though, you know, if you look at the evolutionary psychology of it, it's dumb. One is you're running and you're out of breath and you're physically fatigued. The other is you're sat at your computer table and you can't be asked doing any more work. Do we use the same techniques to break through that barrier, or are they totally two separate things?
No, it's the same. It is the same. Yeah, it totally is the same. So, and again, it comes down to those thoughts, beliefs, emotions. And then the last one is you got to take that action, right? So you can have the best attitude in the world and really going out there and being like, I got this, I'm feeling great, get the best attitude. But if you don't take the action, it doesn't matter. So, yeah. But yeah, it is the same. It's very much the same.
So how do you go about that then? Because you're a positive guy, you're full of energy. And, you know, of course, everyone has that moment in the day where they're going, well, you know, I might just pack it in now and, you know, go for a run or do whatever, do something non-work. What do you do to keep yourself focused? Because clearly, if you're in sales and you can make, it's cliched, I know, but another 10 phone calls or another 5 emails or whatever it is, you've got a real solid opportunity to add to your pipeline with very little downside by just pushing that little bit harder.
Yeah. So one of the things is when you don't want to do something, that is the most important time to do it, right? That's like what makes champions, right? That's what really builds it. And especially in sales, because in sports, you know, there's a fine line too, when you're dealing with with top professional athletes and whatever, you know, a lot of time I had coaches to hold me back a little bit because there's the overtraining principle, but in sales, it's a little bit different, right? Now, to put in those extra 5 calls, all right, that's not that big of an effort. It's more just coming over the mental hurdle, right? But when you have those mental hurdles like that, that's when you got to really hunker down and think like a champion, right? And that's one of the mottos I always have in my mind is think like a champion. What would a champion do? Or what would a top sales professional do in this situation? And when you actually don't want to do it and you pick up that phone and you start doing it, that's when you start to build those mental muscles and you start to develop that grit. And anyone can do it, but again, you got to have that kind of expectation of yourself, and those beliefs in place to really make that happen. So it really starts with your thoughts. So it starts with what I was just saying right there is like, okay, what would a champion do in this situation, right? And one of my favorite sayings too is there's a great guy out there named Jocko Willink. He's got a great book, Willink, I should say. It's called Extreme Ownership. People should definitely read it. But one of his sayings is discipline equals freedom. And it's so true. You know, when you're disciplined about things and you consistently go out there and put in the time to, you know, get to goals or whatever it may be, that allows you a lot of freedom that being lazy doesn't allow you, right? So it starts with that. And then when you really create those kind of thoughts and you start to tell yourself that kind of story, you know, as Tony Robbins really talks about that story, and that develops your beliefs, right, around what it is, right? So you start to give yourself an empowering story around these hard things, you know, then it starts to help you really get your head in the game and start to go out there and take action. And then you just got to get your emotions going in the right direction too, right? And so, you know, your main man, Tony Robbins, you know, they teach in sports psychology too, that you got to control your emotions. And one of the ways you can do that is through your breathing. So in a situation like you're talking about where it's like, I don't really want to do this with salespeople, you got to hype yourself up in that case. You got to get going. So you can put on some good music. You can dance around. You can start to control your breathing. You can stand in your superhero position like Superman or Superwoman, right? And, you know, you can start to do these things, control your breathing, and then you start feeling good. You start feeling hyped up, and then you can go out there and you got to take that action after it. So that's kind of a small breakdown of how that more or less works. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. I love it. So have you got to turn this into a habit then, though, of, because most people's habit, I guess, is you go, we can't be asked, and then you put the telly on. Have you got to interrupt that pattern of behavior? And then perhaps it is as simple as just standing up, or because I know I'll listen to some, whether it be really poppy, cheesy rock music tends to get me motivated at whatever reason, or like dubstep or drum bass or whatever it is with a bit more energy and a bit more to it. I can listen to 30 seconds of that and be a brand new person straight afterwards, and that makes a real difference to me. But I guess where I struggle with this, and perhaps other people do as well, is knowing that I should do that, and because there's a lower barrier to entry of energy to put on dance music for 5 minutes versus to go back to work. So is there any ways to instill this as a habit perhaps for myself and the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things is you got to start asking yourself questions that are going to your mind will focus in on the questions that you ask yourself. And Tony Robbins gets into this, and other psychologists out there, that, the prevailing question that you start asking in your head all the time when things start getting tough it's going to dramatically increase your chances of getting something done. So if you're sitting on the couch, you're lazy, and you're thinking, why am I always so tired? Or, why do I never want to do this work? You're going to sit there and you're going to come up with all the reasons why you're so tired and you can't do the work and whatever it may be, right? And what if you ask yourself the question, am I getting closer to my goal right now or further from my goal? Do I want to be a champion or do I want to be a loser? Do I want to be the best, or what is it going to take for me to be the best I can be? Right? How do I make this better? When you start asking questions like that, you're like, oh, okay, well, I can get up off my butt and do this, that, or the other thing. Or, sometimes too, or you can just take action, right? You can just get up, be like, all right, that's it. I'm up. I'm going to get up. I'm going to do this, and start taking that action. And, that again, alone will just kind of change your physiology and you get into it. But I think you just got to take pride in having that discipline equals freedom. That hey, when I don't want to do it, this is the most important time for me to go out there and do it. And that's how you build those habits and that grit. And that's what really makes top sales professionals and athletes and top performers, anything really.
Definitely. I think you've probably just simplified it even further as well. That's me trying to make it more complex again, because getting disciplined to just man up and get on with it in that moment, to when you feel like yourself, when you're just about to slack, just do it. That's probably the simplest way to go about it, and clearly once you do it over and over and over, it'll become normal. And I learned or taught myself to do this from simply just getting out of bed in the morning. I think it was Tim Ferriss who said this. I think it was who I got it from. He said when he wakes up, he just throws the covers off him, stands up, makes his bed, and then by the time you've done that, you kind of look at the bed and you go, well, I don't really want to get back in it now that I've made it look pretty and neat. And so that's what I've done every day for the past 10 years since whenever I read that. And other people, or my girlfriend, for example, likes to snooze, and it frustrates me now being up in the morning, and she wants to snooze and cuddle for 10 minutes or whatever, and I'm like, let's get on with it. And clearly I'm just getting up and making a cup of coffee and sitting on the sofa, but it's more productive than just snoozing that bit longer. So I appreciate that. And, that is probably what I'm taking away from this episode as well, Kerry, that for every time you try and do something, it's probably worth just thinking, how can I simplify this and make it easier on my brain so that there's one action rather than 5, and there's less build up and you just get on with it. I think that's real key to all of this.
Yeah, sometimes, because the fact of the matter is I feel like that about things too. Sometimes I'm like, I really don't want to do this right now. But most of the time I'm like, just man up, let's go. Just do it. And that's it. I don't really think about it. Just go and do it. And this is what champions do and whatever. So I don't have to sit there and have to think and break it down. And it's kind of like in triathlon, sometimes you got to go and swim. And a lot of people don't like to swim. And one of the things they don't like about swimming is you got to get into that cold water sometimes. And they're like, and they get in easy. That's the worst way to do it. Just 3, 2, 1, just dive in there, and then you're pretty much good to go. But if you put your foot in, and then you kind of slip down to your knees and then your hip, it's way worse. Just get on with it. So
nice.
Yeah.
That's the perfect analogy, I think, to sum it up. Okay, Kerry, we've got some questions, quick 5 questions that I'm going through with every guest that comes on the show now. A couple of these you might want to expand on slightly more rather than just a one-word answer, but it's totally up to you. First one, which do you prefer? And you may have just answered this already. Do you prefer to run or do you prefer to swim?
You know what? Swimming, biking, and running, I like them all for what they are. They're all cool in their own way, and so I'm pretty neutral on that. So,
gun to head, which one would you choose?
Swim. guess.
Nice. Cool. Okay, next one. Dollar size if possible. What's the biggest deal you've ever closed?
Biggest deal I've ever closed. You know what? I don't know if I can disclose that right now because I'm under contract with someone.
Nice.
But it's very big for that.
Good. Okay, next one. What is one book or resource other than perhaps what we've talked about so far that you'd recommend to the Salesman podcast audience?
Oh man, I go through a lot of books. But I'm gonna go with the all-time. The one I suggest the most is Tony Robbins' "Awaken the Giant Within." I think that's a really solid one. But I've got tons of other good ones too.
Nice. I read that once a year. It takes me about a month to get through it, but every single time I get more and more value out of that. So I appreciate the answer.
Yeah.
What does the first 60 minutes of your day look like?
First 60 minutes of my day, I get up and I take my dog for a walk, and then we go, and then I listen to a podcast like Salesman Red plug, and then or I listen to books. Definitely go through a lot of books. Probably do audio books too. That's the best way for me to go through them when I'm driving or walking or whatever. So yeah, that's what I do.
Cool. And final one of these, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at sales?
I would tell him to go and read that Tony Robbins book and really just work on the mental aspect and look at some of the sports psychology stuff, because the main thing that held me back in the beginning was the mental aspect. Because I was getting lots of no's, and I thought one of the things is I didn't expect I was going to get so many no's and it was going to be so hard in the beginning, and I didn't come out right from the get-go swinging and rocking it. So I found it very hard to keep my confidence, and so I would say I would go at getting books like that, learning the sports psychology, and just really learning how to control that.
And any specific sports psychology books? You mentioned one. Is there any others that you'd recommend for the audience?
Yeah. So Lanny Basham, it's got a weird, I think it's the mental management system. That's a really good one. Obviously the Tony Robbins type stuff is really good. Man, there's some other ones in there. There's a great personal development book called 99 Seconds. There's a lot of really good books, but those are some of the really good ones. Yeah.
Awesome. We'll link to all those in the show notes over at salesman.red for everyone who's listening. And with that, Kerry, tell us a little bit about how to kick an ass in sales.com. And I'm pumped for you with this because it takes, of everything we talked about now, you have kind of put it in practice in that you're doing these daily videos, and it takes a lot to put out content like that. And I watch them every day and I enjoy them. So tell the audience a little bit about them and about the site as well.
Sure, yeah. So I've got a website that is very ugly right now, and I'm redoing it. But it's called howtokickassinsales.com. I make a daily video and a daily podcast. And if you guys have any questions that are out there on something that's getting you stuck or whatever, you can ask me it, and I help you out. And that's one of the coolest things. People, I've had a lot of guys, but I've completely blown this deal. I'm halfway through it. This, and that's happened. How do I handle it? And I've told them, and a lot of the time they get success. I only hear about the guys where they apply and it works. I'm sure there's been a few people applied that tanked, but that's sales, right? So, but for the most part, people get really good results and whatever. But that's what I'm doing there. You guys can go check it out. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on iTunes too. And like I said, if you get anyone out there has any questions, I'm more than happy to make you a podcast and a video.
Amazing stuff. I appreciate that. The audience will as well, I'm sure. And with that, Kerry, I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman podcast.
Well, hey, thanks for having me, Will. I love your podcast. Happy to be on here, and you keep rocking it out too.
And there we have it. Kerry, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your insights. Sales Nation, as always, thank you for tuning in and giving me your attention. I massively appreciate it. There's lots of other content out there. I think that we're the best B2B sales content for a millennial audience. I'm pretty confident of that. But yeah, either way, there's still lots of distractions in Netflix. And so by tuning in, you're both growing our audience, and hopefully you're getting a lot out of these episodes as well. If you haven't already, it's well worth checking out Jay Papasan's show, which aired yesterday, where we dive into the one thing and how narrowing your focus with just one simple question can lead to a huge upside on the other end of that question. It's available in the show notes over at salesman.red/190. And with that, I'll speak with you all again on tomorrow's episode.